Nicholas, factually, a lot of things need to be put in place, because we talk about Liliesleaf, but Madiba was never ever arrested at Liliesleaf, and he was not even arrested on close to the time that the rest were arrested. In fact, he was arrested a year later.
Earlier.
I beg your pardon, a year earlier than the others.
Correct. He was arrested in August of '62.
Yeah.
He had actually been summoned back to South Africa. He was on his secret African mission, which included a visit to London to galvanize support for the newly formed military wing and to raise funds. And he had been called back. He arrived back towards the end of July '62, and he spent several days at Liliesleaf. And during that period, he actually buried a semi-automatic Makarov and 200 rounds of ammunition and a khaki uniform.
Yeah.
And from there, after briefing various committees, he went down to brief Chief Lutuli in Durban of his African mission, and also to, I suppose, put at ease because of the concerns that some people had had in the Congress Alliance and the movement around his apparent black African or black nationalist statements, which they felt ran contrary. So he had been summoned back, and then he'd gone, and then of course he left from Durban and was arrested just outside Howick, and the raid took place effectively 11 months later in July '63.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, it's interesting to know the history and to know exactly the events that were unfolding. But you were telling me that, and we've seen the photographs of people all around South Africa putting flowers and cards or T-shirts or whatever they want to, and painting their cars at different places. And Liliesleaf is not being left out. You were saying that in the room that Madiba stayed in at the time, but under a completely different name at that time, people are coming and bringing cards.
Well, people have been bringing cards, they have been signing condolence books and condolence cards and flowers. In fact, we've taken out 3 rather large portraits that we have of Madiba, which are in the library in the archive, and have placed them outside by the coffee shop, so people are able to place their flowers and candles there near the pictures.
Yeah, we've got some visuals here of Mandela's actual capture site in Howick, the one that you were referring to a little bit earlier. We're going to play it over there. Talk to us about this day. There's Mandela's capture site that we do have.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. People are still questioning as to how they caught him, how the apartheid state caught him. There are a number of theories. One is that the CIA were involved, and that what actually had transpired was during the major roundup that had taken place, they had rounded up a gentleman who was actually part of the CIA. He wasn't an informer, he was an operative. And Colonel van den Berg had discovered this and was furious because he had met with the CIA and had sought assurances from them that they would not operate in South Africa unless he was informed. He had discovered that they were operating in South Africa. He wasn't informed. And we think, as a way to placate him, they said that this operative can tell you where Mandela is. And the Atlantic Journal, several years ago, covered a story which said about a gentleman by the name of Paul Eckhart, who walked into Wendell Holmes's office in Langley and said, "This is the greatest day in CIA history. We've given up Nelson Mandela, but no one will ever know about it."
Yes.
So there is clear indications that the CIA were involved, but again, there's no factual proof. I mean, there's no documentary evidence to be able to say quite categorically this is what happened.
Yeah, amazing. Your time of meeting Mandela, what was the first time you met him?
Well, actually, the first time I met him was a telephone conversation in 1990. I had just arrived home from work. I walked into the lounge, or into the entrance hall, and my mother thrust the phone into my hand and said, "Say hello," and I had no idea who I was speaking to.
And how old were you?
I was in my early, I don't know, how old was I? I was 27.
27.
Yeah. I had no idea who I was speaking to, and I just took the phone and I said hello, and this voice came back and said, "Hello, Nick, how are you?"
Wow.
And I was, for a split second, I put my hand over the receiver and I said, "Is that Nelson?" Very quietly to my mother. She said, "Yes." So I carried on the conversation. But what struck me was that he was asking questions about me. He was wanting to know what I'd been up to, what I had been doing. And in fact, one of the first things he said to me is, "I remember you because you were ill as a baby."
Yeah.
And it was, looking back, it was almost as if he was trying to make up for 27 years. He was trying to fill in that missing period, and almost like sucking the marrow from the bone of life to make up for that period of incarceration. And it was a very awe-inspiring conversation, because I was so taken aback by the fact that he just wanted to hear about what I had been up to. He wasn't, every time I tried to ask him about him, I recall him deflecting the conversation back to me. It was if, "No, I don't want you to know about me. I want to know more about what you've been up to." And then I went to work the next day and they said, "What did you do last night?" So I just said, "I spoke to my leader." And they said, "Who?" I said, "Nelson Mandela." And someone piped up by saying, "Oh, okay, I spoke to George Bush."
Oh my gosh.
The leader of the free world. They didn't believe me at all.
Yeah, they didn't believe you, but you did. Nicholas, before I let you go, and let's end off this interview. I mean, that beautiful statue that we're all looking at now, which is actually at the site of the capture. Those are the visuals you're looking at in case you're wondering, for the viewers at home. Nicholas, your desire and your wishes for the legacy and the memory of Mandela going forward. I mean, it's a very important juncture we're at right now, because we need to preserve this legacy, and you are one person that, by doing what you're doing at Liliesleaf, is trying to preserve the legacy of him and those that worked with him to get this freedom that we have. What are you hoping for going forward?
Well, I'm hoping that this outpouring of, I wouldn't say grief, because I think it's a mixture of grief, celebration and joy that we were able to have such a unique figure, such a great figure, who assisted us and enabled the CODESA process to move forward, and at those critical times, like the assassination of Chris Hani, was able to bring calmness, a sense of understanding, and ensuring that Nelson's words, as well as those of the other comrades, their ideals, the spirit of what they fought for, the principles, the legacies that they have and that they maintained during the struggle, are not forgotten. And one of my concerns is that we are at a crossroads, and it's quite interesting. Adam Habib talked about the moment of reckoning. So you either use the word at a crossroads or moment of reckoning, where our liberation struggle and the ideals and the principles and the values, again, like former President Mbeki articulated at the synagogue last night, do not become lost or forgotten or relegated to the rubbish heap of history. My concern is that going forward, are we going to remember what Nelson actually stood for? I mean, "I am prepared to die for" speech. Yeah. That was a critical speech. It was a seminal speech. It was a speech that was not only given to the local, given to South Africans, it was presented to the world, where he says, "I've fought against white domination, I've fought against black domination. It is the ideals for which I am prepared to die." They are incredibly powerful words, which symbolize and articulate what the struggle was about. They go to the heart of the struggle. He also gave a justification as to why they moved away from passive resistance, very eloquently explaining it. And again, these are incredibly important words that are not forgotten, so people can understand why the ANC moved away. And then in his inaugural speech, where he says, "Never, never again." Yeah. And also he goes on to say, in The Long Walk to Freedom, the long walk to freedom may have got us to the point of democracy, but there is still a longer walk to take, and that walk could even be much harder than the struggle itself. And we need to ensure that during this period of celebration, during this period of honouring and remembering the legacy of Mandela, we don't lose those prophetic words that he spoke in "I'm Prepared to Die For" speech, his inaugural speech, and in his book, because I think we have to ensure that we preserve them and they become part of who we are. going forward. People are using the word, this is a time for reflection, a time to reflect. We must use this opportunity to reflect and look at where we are and see whether our deeds and where we are today are reflective of those prophetic words spoken by Nelson 50 years ago next year. Ironically, next year will be the 50th anniversary of his I'm Prepared to Die For speech, and 20 years ago with regard to his inaugural speech as the first democratically elected president of the Republic of South Africa.
Amazing. Those words are absolutely unbelievable, Nicholas. Thank you very much. And I do believe and hope that that is the light in which Madiba is remembered going forward. Beautiful words. Nicholas Wolpe is the founder and chief executive of the Liliesleaf Trust. Nicholas also telling me that on Friday, if you'd like to make your way down to Liliesleaf, you've got an orchestra playing some
National
music.
Youth Orchestra.
The National Youth Orchestra, 11 o'clock, Liliesleaf.
Yes.
60 Rand a ticket to get in.
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So that's happening at Liliesleaf. Thanks for being our guest here on this special broadcast.